Kim Connolly. I'm the Assistant Director over at the Center for Leadership and Ethics. So welcome to VMI, and hope you're enjoying the conference so far. We're keeping you guys moved around to keep you all engaged and interested. And I am honored today to introduce you your breakout speaker for this session, Kathryn Thompson. She is the Executive Director of the Southside Transformation Opportunities for Residents and Youth. It's a nonprofit outside of Richmond, Virginia, that helps economically disadvantaged persons in Virginia's Southside region. She holds a BS from Virginia Commonwealth University, and we invited her here because it's what her life was like before getting to where she is today. That is a shining example of grit and resilience and growth. So without further ado, Kathryn, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Okay. Very honored to be here today. This is my first public speaking opportunity on this level. I did write an 11-page speech, but like I told the last group, I couldn't get through it without crying. So this morning I decided to chuck it, and I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. But I've been doing that for 3 years, so it's okay. When Kim contacted me, she asked me to tell about being a formerly homeless individual and then kind of bring it forward into co-founding story. So I was going to VCU, and in my sophomore year had an unexpected pregnancy, and that's what really started my plight into homelessness. When I had to drop out of college, I was getting financial aid, and that was like offsetting the bills with me working at CVS Pharmacy part-time. But then that kind of went away, and so that's what pretty much jump-started everything. I did have an apartment off campus my second year. The first year I lived in the dorms, and I was living with my son's father at the time. He was 19, and I was 21 when we found out that we were going to have a baby. So I was the first person in my family to go to college, so my mom was pretty devastated, and she asked me to terminate the pregnancy. His mother had also had his sister at a very young age, and they had gotten married, and his parents are still together, so she was demanding that we get married. So I kind of had two very strong sides coming at me, and my mother was like, this is going to ruin your life, you need to graduate college. So I had to sit down and kind of, figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? So I chose to keep Christian and become a mother. But I really struggled a lot with anger because my whole life, as I had planned it, started falling apart immediately with that decision. So I had to drop out, and when we lost the financial aid, he was helping his sister cover her bills, and which was taking money out of our household. So that started, putting us at risk a little bit. I did go into the SunTrust temporary labor pool and started working full-time once I dropped out as an administrative assistant at their corporate headquarters downtown in Richmond. And I brought my first car. It was a Mitsubishi Mirage. It was candy apple red. And I love that little car. And so I'm managing, but expenses are also growing, and his money's not coming into the household, so it's snowballing. And I went home one day, and I just heard a voice. I was sitting in the living room. I heard a voice say, "You're about to lose everything." And because he spent so much time at his sister's house, he had gotten me a little white lab puppy, and I had named her Snowball. So Snowball was like my best friend. We did everything together. And so I was like, all right, about to lose everything. Just don't take the puppy. I can make it if you don't take the puppy. And so a few weeks later, we're getting evicted because the rent's behind. We're, trying to put as much stuff as we can in storage. He goes to live with his family. I go to live with my best friend, Nikki, at the time. She lived with her mom, and they had a 2-bedroom apartment in the West End. So Nikki was very gracious. She allowed me to share her bedroom for quite a few years. It ended up being. So I moved in with her, and there was a SunTrust bank pretty close to the apartment. It was in walking distance, so I switched to becoming a drive-through teller at the time and did really great with sales, actually. But by the 9th month, when the false labor starts happening and stuff, Albert and I had started to argue even more than usual and had a pretty significant fight, which led his mother to tell me to go home to my family, which at the time my mother was in Alexandria. So I went home to my mom, and Christian was born in Alexandria Hospital. My mom stayed with me the whole time, 18 hours of labor. He and his family did not come up. They didn't come up after Christian was born, and so I found myself crying a lot, pretty much every day. And as a teenager, I had dealt with depression a lot, so that just, automatically came back. And it upset my mom, and because she was picking up like all of the financial slack on my end because I wasn't working. And to help out a little bit, I voluntarily repoed my car to get welfare, and I wasn't really, too upset about it. It was just something I had to do in order to help, take care of Christian. And I just couldn't stop, crying. And I wasn't in therapy or anything at the time. So, she told me to go back to Richmond, which I did. And I get back to Richmond. We are staying with his father's sister in a 2-bedroom apartment, her husband, her 2 kids. It's me, him, and Christian. So it's a lot of us in a small space. And another argument started, and he actually threw a chair at me while I was holding Christian. Christian was about 6 weeks. I threw something back. It hit her husband, and it was like a brawl on after that. So I had to leave immediately that night. And I called my best friend from high school who was staying at UVA in the dorms, and she said, come there. So I had a friend from my college days at VCU. He came to pick me up, me and Christian up. Took me to the train station and so I could get to UVA, and got to UVA. Christian cried so much. After 2 days, Leslie was like, I really can't take this. He's just crying all the time. I can't study. I can't do this. And I'm sorry, you guys have to leave. And so I called my aunt at home. I'm from West Virginia. So she sent me enough money to catch the bus back to West Virginia. And when I got there, I stayed with my aunt on my dad's side for 2 weeks. She lived in public housing, so I was only allowed to stay for 2 weeks because that's their rule across the board. Then I went to stay with my uncle, and then eventually I ended up with my grandmother who rented a house, and there was like a bedroom space there for me. So I'm still sad that my little family is broken up, and I'm still trying to make it work. So I get a really good job at the chemical plants outside of Charleston, and like Institute and some South Charleston, places like that. There's a ton of chemical plants, and if you get a job at those chemical plants, you're pretty much set for life at home. So I did get a job there making a lot of money for West Virginia. And Christian's dad, he wasn't contributing financially, so I asked him, please come down. We can get a house here. I can pay for everything. You just keep Christian. This is your life choice. So he did come down to visit. He didn't want to stay. He was very attached to his mother and sister. And so I made the decision to quit my really good job in West Virginia and come back to Richmond. So now I am back with my friend that I had to stay with in the beginning. And she's in an even smaller apartment with her mother, and their utility bills were behind. So I had to help with that. Of course, I had to help pay rent and anything, to do with the household. And I think I was making a little above minimum wage. And so with paying the babysitter downstairs and household stuff, I could never save up enough money to move into my own space. Nikki used to catch the bus with me to go buy baby food, and we would have Christian with just like bags and bags of Gerber's jars. And I just remember us struggling trying to get down the street with him and all these, plastic grocery bags full of baby food. So she was just a really great friend at this time in my life. I don't know what I would have done without, her opening her home to me. But I was really mentally exhausted, and I just went outside one day and I was like, God, please give me a free place to live so I can get my life together, because this is crazy, I'm maybe 23 or so, and it's just like everything had caved in on me, and I was really tired. And so I went to church and I was talking to a friend at church, and she had fled a domestic violence situation and was staying at St. Joseph's Villa Flagler home. And so St. Joseph's Villa used to be owned by Catholic nuns, and I think it was an orphanage when it first started. It's a really old property, and it has like 8 cottages on the property, and it's a really beautiful campus. So she's like, apply there, and so I did, and I got in. And I got free room and board for a year and a half. I got free daycare for Christian, and they mandatorily made you escrow 30% of your income, and they kept that account for you and gave it back to you when you were ready to leave. I also had to work with what they called a family life counselor. My counselor's name was Shelley Hall Marrow, and I gave her a really hard time. She didn't care. She would just be like, you have to meet with me, so if you want to be hateful about it, I'm just going to give it right back. She would come to the cottage if I wouldn't go to her office, and just like come and start eating dinner if I was making dinner. But she is really, as I look back, someone that was really in place to help me get my life together. So while I was at the villa, I have what I call my villa sisters. I decided that I was going to go back to college again and start working on my degree. So I started at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College to finish up the lower classes. And they watched Christian for me. And if they weren't available, then, Christian was a little toddler, I'd get some coloring books and crayons and threaten his little life, and we'd sit in the back of the classroom, and he would be good, and I would learn, and we'd go home. And so finished up at J. Sarge, reapplied to VCU, went back to VCU, and I stayed at St. Joseph's Villa for a year and a half, and I left there with close to $2,000 saved up. I had found a job while in the program with another nonprofit called First Homes. So what they did was take homeless women from the transitional housing programs, like the one I was in, put them in renovated HUD homes to become first-time homeowners. So I got accepted into that program, but when I was offered the job as assistant to the executive director, I had to make a choice, either job or program. So I chose job. I really enjoyed working there. I enjoyed helping all of the families that were coming through the program. We had a ton of success stories. I learned a lot. My first week there, the director threw like 30 HUD reports for properties at me. And we were in a small, he was a former Catholic priest, so we were in a very small office in a church. And I had papers just because he said, here, do these reports, and he just walked out. And I was like, what, So I called my mom, and, I'm 25, and I'm like, Mom, I don't know how to do this. And she's like, just shut up and learn and put it on your resume, is what she told me. So I was like, okay. So I literally had property reports spread on every inch of the office because we shared one office space, and I taught myself how to do the property reports. He eventually started to involve me in grant writing, which is how some of my experience today came about. And I just started getting involved in stuff that I hadn't been exposed to as his assistant. And so that job lasted for about 3 years, and then he decided that he didn't want the responsibility of being an executive director and went to another nonprofit. So First Homes got absorbed into Virginia Supportive Housing, I think it's called now, which is a much larger nonprofit, and I lost my job. But I went to Wachovia Brokerage after that. Um, and at age 26, so that was in 2000, I had my son David in April, and in August was purchasing my first home. And I had taken some of the financial aid refund money to put the house down. As a child, my mom, she moved us from West Virginia to Alexandria, Virginia, I think my last year of middle school. And every time they raised the rent, because she was a single mom, like, we had to move. So I moved every year. It could be we were in the same apartment complex, but we moved across the street or across the parking lot. Whatever was the rent that she could afford is where we ended up moving, but always in the same neighborhood. So I didn't really want my kids to grow up moving every year like that, which was why I decided to purchase a house. And the realtor I was working with, he was like, "What locality do you want to live in?" I actually had a dream that I was going to be in a house with that was gray with green shutters. So I just said, "Go find the gray house with green shutters." And he's like, "This girl is crazy." And I was like, "You'll find it. I'm not worried." And so he was actually going down a back road or something one day and got lost and ended up finding a gray house with green shutters that was about to be put on the market but wasn't. And he's like flipping out when he calls me. And he's like, "I can't believe it, but I found the house you were talking about." And so I went over to meet him, and I walked through the house. I was like, "Great, you found the house. Let's do it." So I've been in that house for 18 years. My youngest son, David, I was trying to move in his end of junior year, beginning of senior year of high school, like a year and a half ago, and he about had a heart attack. He's like, "This is my childhood home. You can't do this to me." And I was like, "I didn't teach you about change. You can't deal with change." So in my last semester of college in 2003, I had a full-time job, I had 2 small children, and I had an internship at a nonprofit called Hilliard House, which was also helping homeless women with kids. And I knew that I wanted to go into nonprofit development and help raise money for good causes in college. That was where my brain was. So graduation day, walking across the stage to get the diploma, I'm like so excited, but I'm also exhausted because I didn't sleep for 3 months. So I get my piece of paper that I worked so hard for, and I got to my mom and aunt, and I just like collapsed in tears. So they're like, "What is wrong? This is a happy day. You're the first person to graduate college in the family." And I was like, "You don't understand. I did it. It's over. Like, I can go to sleep." I'm just happy. So it took me a while to kind of start doing things that are considered public relations. I went into banking. I did title insurance. I did the brokerage. But I always really wanted to do PR. I love writing, and I wanted to do nonprofit development. And so I got a call in 2012 from someone who was like a mother to me that was working at the Petersburg Housing Authority, and she was like, "Can you come down and help me with resident services?" So I asked her, I was like, "What is resident services?" And she's like, "I don't know, we have to figure it out. Can you just come help me because I trust you? I need someone I can trust with this project." So at that time, I was closing loans of Bank of America, and I was helping people, but just not on the scale that I wanted. So I put in my 2 weeks notice, and I was in a nice area, like in Richmond, close to Glen Allen. And then I went to work in Petersburg, and it was like, for me, the first day was like entering the twilight zone. It was just, Petersburg felt heavy. There was so much poverty. There was the mental hospital, I think, was beginning to close down. So you had people with like serious mental illnesses that needed to be hospitalized walking the streets. I had never seen so much poverty in my life. And, I get there and I'm like, "Oh, what did I just do?" So, I get there and I'm like, "Okay, Regina, what do you want me to do? And the only instructions she gave me was resident services and just don't make me look bad in the community. So I was like, okay. So I asked her, I was like, are you giving me complete creative freedom? And she said yes. And so that was the first time in any job that, that had happened. So I was pretty excited. And I was like, okay, let me figure out what this is. And so they had 2 multifamily properties in Petersburg and 1 senior high-rise. So all in all, maybe close to 500 units of public housing that I was responsible for doing, like programs and services for the residents, community events. I got to work with local government officials. I got to work with other nonprofits and agencies. The Housing Authority hadn't really been engaged with the Petersburg community for a while, so everyone was really happy I was there. They were bringing programs onto the property now. They had access, and I started writing a little more grants. And then Hopewell staff, noticed my work, and they had a job come open, and I applied for the job and was given the job of resident services manager with that agency. And I was given the job over a staff person that had been there for, I think, at least 20 years or more, and was very hostile towards me. So I ended up having a lot of job stress. And I forgot to mention in my story, after the second child, David, he's very outspoken. There used to be a little sitcom that we would watch. I can't think of the name of it right now. But he literally came up to me one night and he was like, "Mom, that family has a mommy and a daddy in the house, and you need to work on this for us." So I was like, okay. It's like 5. And so, I am a real life 90-day fiance story. I flew to Nigeria and married. I'm divorced now. But I did, if you watch that TLC show, I watch it. It's like, oh, it's my life. My mother was like, why do you keep doing stuff to give me a heart attack? But I did. I went to Nigeria all by myself to get married. And boy, was that an adventure. We missed our plane, and we were in the upper part of the country and had to get down to the south. And so I learned that you will get stopped by soldiers and policemen every so miles asking for a bribe of cash. And they could tell that I was foreign. And so, Godwin and I had to catch a car down to the south. And they just kept searching like every item of clothing, and they had rifles, and him and the taxi driver were scared. I was just furious. I'd had enough. And so we got to one stop, and the soldier was like, your rich American wife said you should pay the bribe if you want to keep going. And I was like, his rich American wife didn't say anything, and if you want to see how much clothes I have, I'll do it myself. And I was like, stop touching my clothes. So the taxi driver's like looking like, shut up, we're going to get shot. And I was on the phone with my friend Artisha, because she had my kids, because my mom was like, I refuse to help you with this. And, I was like, Artisha, I got to call you back because the man has a rifle pointed at us. And he keeps touching my clothes. And I wasn't able to call back for like hours. And so by this time, she had called my boss, who had called the embassy, who had called Nigeria. And they were like trying to find me. And so, of course, no one really wanted to watch my kids for me to go back and forth to Nigeria again. But it took 5 years to get Godwin here. Then on top of the cultural differences and bringing the job stress home, we ended up separated. And I came home one day, and I was just always like a snapping turtle because I just had too much stress. And, he stopped me at the door, and he was like, you can't come in here like this today because you're like a piece of wood that's been soaked in gasoline, and we don't know what's going to light the fuse. And so I just stood there in the doorway, and I was like, all the doors are closed, and no one's really happy to see me. And so I really took that in, and I was like, well, I don't want to be this kind of person for my family. So I decided to go to therapy. my marriage still fell apart, but I was having, great professional success in Hopewell. We did get rid of the one staff person, and I got two really great staff people. So we worked on community relations. Most of our events that we did, we were covered in the paper. I got to write press releases. I got to work on websites. I was really getting to use my creative talents, so that made me pretty happy. And then I ran into a program officer that worked for VHDA at the Allergist, and I'm telling her my 90-day fiance story, and she's just in tears, just laughing. So she was like, you should apply for a capacity building grant for the Housing Authority, and that is a 3-year project, and it's $60,000. So I said, okay, we'll apply. And I go back and I talk to the director, and he's like, Kathryn, create a nonprofit. So I didn't know what was going on with like HUD level of funding or anything. I didn't know why he wanted the nonprofit created. I just said, okay. So we get awarded the $60,000, and he's like, your project manager. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to be project manager on this scale. So Google was my very best friend, and we got through year 1. The Housing Authority got a 5-year strategic plan. Year 2, we started to create story. I did have 2 consultants working with me, and I still work with one to this day. She is a lifesaver. And we're doing IRS paperwork, and I hate accounting, and if it's not scientific math, I'm really not interested in it. It gives me a headache. And so it's just so much IRS paperwork, and I'm like, what have I done? What have I done? Can we give the money back? And he's like, yeah, no, we can't give it back. So we get that done. We get the IRS paperwork filed, and all the stories I heard, it takes like forever for you to get your nonprofit status. Ours was turned around so quickly, it was scary. And by the end of year 2, Steve had let us know that HUD funding had been slashed so much for resident services that the Resident Services Department was going to lose their job, except for one grant-funded position that I had gotten grant money for. She would get to stay. And so he said, what I'm going to do is cover your salary and Terrence's salary for a year, and you will be the executive director of Story, and he can help you. So I was just like, where's this plan coming from? This is not in my life plan. And so, I told him, I said, I don't want to be the executive director of Story. This is getting to be too much. And he turned his chair around and he was like, I'm not really worried about it. Isn't this the job God has for you? And I was like, we'll see about that. So I did like a nationwide job search. I sent my resume as far away as Hawaii. I didn't care where we moved to. I drove back and forth to Maryland trying to go home like 5 times, trying to get a job there, but nothing panned out. I Skype interviewed twice for a job with the United Way in Montana, and was super excited because I love hiking in nature, and it was close to Yellowstone. And then, David on the flip side of that is like, we don't even talk about Montana in school. What's in Montana? Why are you? So David's calling like both sides of his family, like, somebody save me, she's lost it. So I took all calls all day one day. Like, my mom said, why are you trying to take my grandson to Montana? And she's worried about the minority population up there. I said, well, Mom, there's Native American reservations. We'll just go mix with them. We're brown. So she's like, oh my God. So I didn't end up getting the job for the United Way, and I did end up having to become the executive director of Story. I remember when we got our second grant, I was like, I had to go up and accept it. The board of directors made me do it. I didn't even want to do that. And I was like, I'm really uncomfortable with this title. I don't know how to do this title, but thank you for this money. So with Story, our signature program, the ML2 after school program, started out as a pilot under the Housing Authority. The Cameron Foundation had given us a grant to pilot it underneath the Housing Authority because Hopewell had no youth programs at all citywide for youth in the city. And the youth in public housing, we looked at their grades, and I sat on like a truancy committee with the school and stuff. Their math and reading grades were about 2 or so grades behind the average student in Hopewell. So we decided to pilot an after-school program that focused on math, literacy, and leadership, and that's why we call it ML2. We started in the Thomas Ralph Court community because I hadn't been able to do so many programs and activities there. So we picked that property, and it had the most crime, also is why we picked it. So over the course of 3 years, I think we've served anywhere from 75 to 100 kids. This year I've capped enrollment at 30. We started out with the one Cameron grant, and it was $25,600. And then John Randolph Foundation came on board the next year, so that bumped us up a little bit. But I remember looking at the 990, and like the first year it was around 30,000, and then with the grants that we got last year going into this grant cycle sum, our budget has gone over 100,000, so that was some really hard work on my end. I've had to be both executive and program staff for the organization, so I've pretty much been the only full-time staff person for the last 3 years. Right now, because we do have the funding, I do have 2 program assistants, and we've partnered with Virginia State University to also have math students that are trained to go out into the community. And they were in Petersburg, and they came to Hopewell at my request to do math activities with the kids in these localities because they're so far behind in their grades. And while I was getting Story off the ground, like my personal life was completely falling apart. I had gone through a second separation with my husband that ended up resulting in divorce, and then my oldest son ended up getting arrested, and first it was just the county jail, and then he went to a party with his cousins and was left behind and ended up with some guys he really didn't know too well, and they decided to stop a car and rob the car, try to rob the car at gunpoint, and luckily, the man got away. But Christian was there, and so he was tied up into this madness, and I was just like, I always told you, watch your associations. So while I'm really struggling to get Story off the ground, I'm having him take every Tuesday to probation because he has to check in. So I had to get him there in the morning, get to Hopewell, by no later than 9. The probation officer didn't want him catching the bus. He had to be picked up and driven, back to my house because he was monitored by an ankle bracelet. And, I had a dream that, it was going to get a little shaky and he was going to be in jail for a little while. And I was just like, God, please not the penitentiary, because that's just going to break me if I have to visit a penitentiary. So he ended up with a misdemeanor charge. The other 2 got felonies. And he spent 6 months in the Richmond City Jail. And I had to go, visit the Richmond City Jail every week to, make sure my kid is okay. And I just remember when David and I first found out he was in jail, like that first call that we had to take we thought we were going to get to see him face to face, and it was actually with a phone and a video screen. We weren't prepared for that, so we just laid our heads down in the little cubicle thing and just cried. But we got through that, and I somehow managed to still stay focused and raise grant money for Story. Our consultant, Najma, has really helped me a great deal. This year I was fortunate enough, I'm in a novel writing class, and one of the persons in the class, she writes for Richmond Magazine, so they did a feature story on me in March. And then I was also honored by Giving Tuesday in their Women Who Give campaign. So February, I also had to run through gunfire with the kids. After I got them off the bus, I literally got the last kid off the bus, and we were just running through gunfire. So that was what the Richmond Magazine article covered somewhat. So I think I've been placed in a position to help children that are exposed to trauma on a daily basis. I think I have compassion to work with these kids from some of my own childhood experiences, and my goal is to leave a very solid foundation of the nonprofit that I helped create, so that the Southside region residents who are extremely impoverished, low education, are most likely to end up in jail themselves, have a organization that can help them make better life choices. And our tagline is transforming lives one story at a time. So that's what I'm working on.
All right, thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you.
So that is quite the story. And, you know, as you remember, we all said, you know, grit is growth, resolve, integrity, and tenacity. So I think Kathryn's story exemplifies that. Questions from all of you for Kathryn? Does anybody have questions, comments?
So I, like you said before, like I have my life planned out to a T. So like, what advice would you give someone that has their life planned out, that doesn't expect any like letdowns or changes in pace?
Life is going to let you know that you can't plan everything exactly. And that stemmed from my childhood, because I always had to, if we were in a crisis, like you had to be able to think quick. But experience will come at you and say, it got to a point where, you know, I used to plan 5 years ahead. Now I'm just like, I'm just going to stay in the present moment today. And that's what I've learned. I'll maybe go 12 months at the most. But I don't plan like I used to, because you can't predict what's going to happen in your life. I couldn't predict getting kids off the bus 2 days before my birthday, you know, and just running through gunfire. I could have been dead right now.
Persistence comes to mind, and adaptability. Do you feel like you're out of that, you know, crisis zone, and do you see kids that you work with, because of the work that you've created, really, for those kids that have had a rough go of it? Do you see your power to give them, some of them at least, a better chance to get out of that pattern, you know?
I do, because the center provides like a pretty stable environment. We've seen their critical thinking skills go up. We've seen their self-esteem scores go up. They're giving pre and post leadership surveys at the beginning of each school year. And so a lot of the kids that are with me right now, I've had them over the last several years. I've seen major changes in behavior. I had one little boy last year, Javier, like we were like begging him to do homework. I was like, what do you need, candy? You know, what do you need? And so this year he came to me and he was like, Miss Kathryn, I'm ready, let's do it. So in addition to the homework that the school gives them, I assign online assignments in education.com. He's just been acing everything. He's working really hard. He told his mentor that he wants to be a banker. And I was like, who knew? I knew he loved paper money. Like, we had to buy digital Monopoly because he kept going like this everywhere. But, you know, he wants to be a banker, so he has a clear goal, and we're going to work with him. We paired him with a really strong mentor.
And if you get that one kid out of there, you will have had a successful life.
Yeah.
And do you think the transitional housing program that you were involved in is the thing that moved you to a new place where you weren't just kind of spinning your wheels and adapt? I mean, in other words, after that, you went and finished your degree, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, for
Was
sure.
that the key, that piece of it?
That was definitely a big piece to the puzzle for me. And transitional housing has a time limit. With public housing, there is no time limit on how long these families can stay. And I think that's a big problem, because what you will see is generations. You've got the grandmother, you've got all the aunts, cousins. Like, I can go across 3 properties in Hopewell and gather up an entire family, just in any direction. You've got consistent dropouts from high school. You've got teen pregnancy. I've got 2 little boys now in the program that definitely had teen moms. So I think because there's no time limit on public housing, there is the family self-sufficiency program that can help, really motivated people. Hopewell has graduated three homeowners from that program. But on average, it's very hard to find those people because this is the environment that they're used to being in. And they don't see, like, there's no one really to show them a different way.
Tenacity that you had throughout the life story, do you see that in the children that you work with on a daily basis?
They're young, and if you ask them, because we asked them last year, what do you think about, and they'll tell you, we just want to live, because there's so much violence, and there's drug use in the community and stuff. They're scared, so I don't think they really think in those terms yet. I mostly work with K through 5 students, so I don't think their brains are there yet.
Before you became pregnant with your first child at college, would you say that you were a highly motivated young woman and that did you have like a family life that stood behind you and motivated you to that point? And is that what kept you going throughout the difficult times?
No. I was very depressed as a teenager. Actually, in the first group I shared that I became involved with a much older person, which caused a lot of chaos in my family. I got sent back to West Virginia from Northern Virginia with my mom trying to, fix the situation. But I was really just looking for someone to say, I care about you on a daily basis. I love you. And I have one really good friend, Tina Front. We were like very similar, and she ended up getting sex trafficked, and she has a nonprofit in DC called Courtney's House, where she now rescues sex trafficked kids. So it's like our childhood life experience has come full circle. I'm working, with kids that desperately need attention. And I think I was one of those kids that really needed attention, just sought it from the wrong sources. So honestly, growing up, I didn't think I'd live to be 30. And once I passed 30, it's like, okay, you're still here. What do you want to leave for legacy?
So, Kathryn, when you talked about that 9th grade teacher
Yeah, I did.
that saw you were struggling
Mhm.
and reached out to you and said, I see potential in you. And part of grit is having the grit to reach out to somebody else. And the other part is accepting their offer of help. To have that grit is something we don't always think about, but it's offering help to other people, which now you're doing.
Yes.
So kind of like what came around, and then, being able to accept that help when somebody offers it. So can you talk about the importance, I think, touching basically on the importance of mentors in people's lives, and that, we all can be mentors. It doesn't have to be a formal mentoring program, but you can see somebody that may be struggling, whether it's a child or an adult, right?
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah. In 9th grade, this was when my mother had found out that I was dating the much older person. We had a pretty eventful night where none of us got any sleep because he had come to our apartment to see me, and sometimes my life can look like a movie, so I'm running from window to window screaming, I'm here. And he's running from window to window on the outside, and my mom had called someone that she knew to bring the gun. We're just going to get this over with now. And my sister's like, Mom, we have to go to school. Can you make it stop? And so I ended up crying, all night that night. And my 9th grade teacher, she pulled me to the side because my eyes were so swollen from crying because I really thought, I was like, they're going to kill you. You have to leave. And so she pulled me aside and she was like, get all your books. You're going straight to the psychologist because you're just not making it, and I can see it. And so I ended up being in therapy that year for the entire year with a school psychologist. She came to do family visits, which was not a normal part of my family's history. So my mom was pretty upset with me, but it was really something I needed at the time because I was suicidal. So that definitely for sure saved me. I've had to, talk to very young children about, are you going to make a choice to go with the kids that are likely end up selling drugs, or are you going to take the other path that's going to be a little bit harder, it's maybe going to take a little bit longer, but at least you won't end up in jail or dead or anything of that nature. You're not harming another family. Unfortunately, the little boy, that I chose, I think his mother has a drinking problem, and so he's really unsupervised. He's maybe 10 at the most. So I've seen him go to the right with the older boys I was trying to keep him from. I'm just one person, so I am glad that we do have mentors coming down from Virginia State University. A lot of kids have not been exposed to college or anything of that nature. So I've taken them on some of their first experiences. I took them up to VSU to tour the campus. I took them to their first theater performance. We went out to eat, and I said we're going to get pizza, and it was at Bottoms Up in Shaka Bottom. They think, automatically, oh, we're going to Little Caesars, and I'm like, no, I got to show you something different. They'd never been to Lewis Skinner Botanical Gardens. We went there last year to see the Christmas lights. I've spent the 2 nights at the Science Museum of Virginia with upper elementary girls, trying to expose them to STEM careers. We just did the Girls in Medicine camp, and I was like telling them, please tell your mom how much fun you're having so they can come sleep on the concrete floor with you next time. But they're like, no, we want you to do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So as a kid, because I was responsible for my brother and sister, I knew I didn't want children. So for me, it's very ironic that I end up being responsible for so many kids. It's just like, how did this happen?
It sounds like on that mentor subject, you had some, like the lady you spoke to about in the residential home, like kind of hard-headed mentors that would stick with you when you didn't want a single one.
Yeah. My Villa sisters and I, we have tried so hard to track Shelley down. And I even contacted Channel 6 News, because when we left the Villa, I was willing to do interviews about their program to help with their fundraising. And they actually did like a 10-minute Facebook Live broadcast with me when we started Story. But we have not been able to locate Shelley. And we just want to say thank you, because we, as a group, don't think we'd be where we are today if she just had not just cracked a whip on us.
Anybody can hide from Google and Facebook.
We've been trying so hard. Thanks.
And what is that, I know, that word story, the story program. What is the, I know the idea is that they expand their story to something that's better. Is that the idea of calling it the story? Is it the story program? Is that literally what it is?
The program is called ML2.
Okay.
The South
Yeah.
Side Transformation.
So I very comfortably self-identify as a writer, and so when we were coming up with names, I was like, this has to identify with my identity as a writer, and I'm going to be telling stories just in real time. And even the logo, if I have brochures up here for anyone that like it, the logo has a quill in it, and I just had a vision of the quill as one of the oldest writing instruments, and how many generations of stories am I going to be able to impact. So that's how we came up with that.
When I think of that, NPR has it's called StoryCorps. Do you know StoryCorps?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Basically, what they do is they talk to people, all kinds of people, to tell their story. In my case, my father worked for the railroad, so it's just people telling the story of what happened to them in their lives. That's the reason it reminded me so much of that.
Okay. That sounds interesting.
Parallel track, you didn't know.
I know. I love NPR.
Any other-
So this may be part of your author or writer thing. Sounds like you pay attention to your dreams or something, like
Yes.
your grade, how
I've actually always dreamed what was going to happen before it happened since a child, actually. It was funny. I was telling Nancy and Kim, they're both from Connecticut, so I have an uncle also who lives in Connecticut, and we went to, we all got together as a family, so we all came, I think we were in Maryland. And he had married a Portuguese woman, and it was my first time meeting her, but I had dreamed she was going to have a son, so I was like, oh yeah, Bella Puzzi, I dreamed that you guys were about to have a son, and he looks like this, and he literally looks just like, I said. They found out, I think maybe a few days later, that she was pregnant, but I really freaked Bella out, and my uncle's like, don't pay, she's just the psychic of the family, don't pay her any attention. But yeah, since a kid, it's always happened, yeah.